Hi, I'm Joe Balcom. Welcome to Iowa News and Views. Thanks for joining us. We're on the road still. We've been on the road for about 8 weeks now, taping shows around the state, and we're here today on the farm of Aaron Heley Lehman over in Polk County, just north of Des Moines, and we're going to be visiting about agriculture in a second here. Before we do, I'd like to kind of try and set this up a little bit. We have been seeing some very low prices for crops recently, and we're going to get into that in a second. But for the past 20 years, we've seen a consolidation of agribusiness industries, giving farmers fewer choices of where they can buy seed and feed and where they can sell their grain and livestock. In 1996, Congress passed the Freedom to Farm Act, which basically removed price supports and put farmers kind of on a roller coaster in the free market system and at the mercy of the free market system. And it's creating some problems here in Iowa for farmers that we're going to talk about. Essentially, the result of the Freedom to Farm Act, it's been indicated that personal farm income has declined over the last 2 years as we've seen large agribusinesses profits skyrocket. In fact, we've seen Iowa beef processing profits doubled to $180 million. Well, why should anybody care about this? Jim Hightower from Texas, former agricultural secretary there, says, if you eat, you are involved in agriculture, so get active. That's a good thing to think about. We're here today with Aaron Heley Lehman, who's the executive director of the Iowa Farmers Union, and Gary Hoskey, who's also active in that organization as its vice president. We're on Aaron's farm here. Aaron has a grain operation, and Gary farms and has both hog, cattle, and a grain operation as well. Thank you both for being with us today. One of the issues, before we get into the content, why don't you, Aaron, give us a little background on Iowa Farmers Union. What's that organization up to, and what are your goals?
Sure. The Farmers Union is a general farm organization, and we represent small to medium-sized family producers here in Iowa. We're part of a national farmers union, which represents farmers around the country. We're a family organization. Nationwide, we have 300,000 family farm memberships. And we work for family farmers in 3 basic ways. We provide education programs where we try to provide as many educational opportunities for our family farm members. We work to help farmers set up cooperatives and to work cooperatively to market their product and to buy their inputs. And we also present our policy, which is developed from our family farmers, and we present that policy to lawmakers on the local, state, and national level. To that effect, we were very active in the Farm Bill debate as Freedom to Farm was being developed, and was encouraging Congress to consider measures that create marketing opportunities for farmers.
Very good. I was neglectful of letting you know, the viewer, that this public access station is not responsible for the content of this program. As always, I'm responsible for what I say, and our guests are responsible for what they say. And it's August 21st today, and the name of our show is Freedom to Farm, Freedom to Fail. Which is it? You decide. And now we're back to a conversation about this whole Freedom to Farm law. One of the issues right now are the commodity prices. Grain prices are really low, livestock prices are really low. Looking at the paper yesterday, why is that right now, Gary? Why are we seeing these prices at such a low level?
It's overproduction.
Okay.
Basically, Freedom to Farm. Before Freedom to Farm, we had more of a supply management program on the grain side, and that was done away with, and now there's been no restrictions. There's no more set aside, and there's just been too much overproduction. And farming is like any other business. If you don't manage your supply, you're going to have an oversupply, and you're not going to have prices that are profitable.
So with prices so low, farmers aren't making any money. Why are we seeing such increased revenues or profits with some of these large businesses that are involved in agriculture, Aaron?
Well, clearly the spread between what the farmer receives for the farm product and what the consumer pays for that product has increased now to record levels. A farmer receives less than $2 for a bushel of grain, but yet for a box of cornflakes, it's over $2.50. There's a huge spread between what the farmer is paid and what the consumer has to pay for that food.
Sure.
So we're we're continuing to see those record profits from corporate agribusinesses.
All right. So overproduction is an issue that holds prices down both in livestock and feed. We had the Freedom to Farm bill passed a couple of years ago. Before that, how were markets regulated and prices determined? What role did the government, for example, play through the farm program, Gary, in that way?
Well, the previous program, you had a corn base, and then you would be, if you wanted to participate in the government program and be eligible for the price supports that were there, you had to set aside a certain amount of your corn base.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it varied from 10 to 20. I don't know how high it ever did get, but that kind of kept a handle on the amount of production, and it kept prices, kind of put a floor under prices. Freedom to Farm has just basically done away with all of that.
So farmers were basically encouraged to plant up to a certain amount of acres in terms of what the markets were going to. The federal government would say, we want this much corn or this much soybeans. Is that how that worked?
Well, they would look at the amount of corn and soybeans from the previous year, and try to estimate what the markets could handle without overproducing and driving the prices down low. And as a result, farmers were participating in the government program. Their payments varied according to the price of the products and according to the weather and to the conditions of foreign markets. They received compensation. If prices were high, farmers received very little compensation, rightfully so. When prices were low, the government was able to establish a floor on those prices. Freedom to Farm, on the other hand, if prices are low or prices are high, whether the weather is good or bad, whether foreign markets are creating opportunities or not, the payment is the same. And that just doesn't make sense. We think the government program to support agriculture should be flexible and should adjust to those conditions which are out of the farmer's control.
So Gary, what's driving Freedom to Farm in terms of that? That's a pretty fundamental change in the farm program to say government's going to be there in bad times to keep people on the land, support farmers. We've said now, let the markets decide. What drove that decision, do you think?
Well, I think, first of all, we need to point out that Freedom to Farm is just a new name that was attached to an old former bill that was called decoupling, and that was pushed by Senator Rudy Boschwitz of Minnesota. And many of us believed that was done at the behest of Cargill. So it was resurrected by Pat Roberts, and he now calls it Freedom to Farm, but it's the same old bill. And what's important for consumers, I think, to realize about this is that the big grain merchandisers are oftentimes the meat packers now too. They're so consolidated, but they take a cut out of corn in every step of the way, whether it's corn or soybeans. They mill it here or they make something else here, and every time they take a cut. So it's to their advantage to have overproduction because they make from volume.
Right.
And by the same token, it's tied to the problems in the livestock sector because all of this cheap corn helps the mega producer because their biggest business expense is corn, and then the protein that comes made from soybean meal.
So the big companies like ADM and Cargill and ConAgra, they'd love to have continued cheap grain prices and overproduction?
Oh, certainly.
Well, I think so. The roller coaster that we've seen with prices doesn't help the farmer at all. In fact, every time we see a boom to bust cycle, the farmers who are most vulnerable, those who are just beginning or those who are trying to make their way into the farming business, they're the ones who are going to suffer. On the other hand, the boom to bust cycle doesn't hamper the agribusiness corporations at all.
I see.
And many would argue that it actually helps.
I was just reading recently that according to a USDA study that cited by Senator Harkin, that lower corn and soybean prices could cause $1 billion loss of farm income in Iowa alone. Is that a one-year figure? Is that in the next couple of years? There's talk about bringing the 99 payment into 98 for given this year. Or?
I looked the other day. I think that you'd be looking at that. Corn, soybeans, both. I imagine that would be a yearly figure.
I see. All right.
Something to remember with that too when farm income declines, our rural communities are really hit hard. And in fact, all of Iowa's economy is hit hard. We produce, we have the largest tractor factory in the world here in Iowa. And if farm income goes down, very few farmers are going to be looking at new tractors, and that is going to trickle down all the way through Iowa's economy, which means fewer quality jobs for all of Iowa.
Sure, there's a lot of concern just about the farm income in general as it relates to those things. Most of our viewers live in cities. Why should folks obviously somebody working at a tractor plant ought to be concerned about farm prices because farmers aren't going to buy. What's the other piece of this for people in cities? Why should people in cities care about what's going on the farm with corn prices?
Well, to go back for just a second, what Aaron was saying, we've heard that John Deere is going to shut down for a week now, and that's definitely going to affect a lot of people in the city, and that's a lot of money, a week's worth of salary and the amount of workers that John Deere's had, and that's directly related to what's going on in agriculture. But the person in the city has to realize that the farmers in America are obviously the envy of the world. We've produced and done way better than anybody else, and that's the reason for that is because it's been single-family farm independent producers. And the way we're moving now is to a corporate structure. And if all you have to do is look at the airfares at the Des Moines Airport, or look at the price of a vehicle with 3 car makers, and you get an indication of what your food prices are going to be if we don't stop this trend toward corporate agriculture and keep it in the hands of family farmer independent producers.
So the concern here is that we're going to have 2 or 3 companies, which we're not far from at this point, controlling the entire food system from the seed stock to the production, harvesting, and processing. Is that where we're headed? How close are we to that, Aaron?
Well, I think we're definitely moving in that direction, and Freedom to Farm is fueling that. The proponents who originally advocated Freedom to Farm argued that when we got to this situation where there is an abundance of corn out there, that the market will correct itself, that certain amounts of land will be brought out of production, and that will correct the price problems. Well, that's really a fundamental flaw in thinking about how things work out in rural Iowa. This land is very productive, and it's going to be used for production agriculture. And whether we want that to be controlled by a broad base of independent producers or we want it controlled by a few corporate agribusinesses is really at stake.
So in terms of the former, let's jump back to the farm program again. We had a program that provided some support to farmers in where weather was a problem or markets were an issue, overproduction. We've gone to this new Freedom of Farm that says you can plant anything you want, presumably, and you can market as you choose, right? Is that what are some of the challenges of the new law, and what are some of the problems of the new law that need to be addressed?
Well, first of all, the people that you have to sell to, ultimately, I mean, they end up with the product, whether you sell directly to a grain elevator, and in many cases they own the grain elevators now, but you got to sell to the people who want this Freedom to Farm type of thinking, and they're the ones who are behind getting it. So right off the bat, you're selling to people who would like to see you produce more so they can make more, and I think that that's different than when you sell to the local elevator who's someone you've worked with and has been your friend and part of your community. We're just going the wrong direction here, and marketing is very difficult. I heard one of our representative candidates here, one in Iowa who's running for state representative or national representative, saying that, well, farmers, some time ago you could have contracted your corn crop from $2.50 to $2.90 a bushel and you wouldn't be hurting now. Well, to contract a crop you haven't grown, first of all, and then secondly, when that price that you can contract it for is already below your cost of production, that's not very good business sense. I mean, we have to make a living out here. We're not going to be here.
Right, I can see that. You're watching Iowa News and Views. We're at midpoint in the show. We are visiting about the farm program here in Iowa, and I'd like to let you know that you should visit our webpage for Iowa News and Views. You can check that out, learn more about what we're up to. We've been producing a show for about a year and a half on state and community issues. We hope you check it out. There's our webpage address, being zoomed in on there. And send us some email if you'd like. You can find out how to do that from the webpage. We're here today talking to a couple people from Iowa Farmers Union. Here's some information about how to get a hold of them. They have an 800 number here in Iowa if you've got questions for either of our guests. We're visiting with Heley Lehman, who's a farmer here in Polk County. Has a grain operation. We're in fact sitting on his farm this afternoon. And Gary Hoskey, who is the vice president of Iowa Farmer Union. He farms over in Tama County. Has a hog, cattle, and grain operation there. Back to our topic. Talking about who's making money on the farm and who's not. It seems like the big companies are doing just fine, making money. How are we going to reverse this trend, Aaron, in terms of what are some of the provisions that we might push towards, or the Iowa Farmers Union push towards to see some changes in that?
Well, we think there are a number of things that we need to do in order to revive the safety net for rural America. The first thing is to raise the rate that farmers have to market their product effectively. We think that the government involvement in agriculture should help farmers market their product, not just a simple payment given out no matter what the market conditions are. We need a helping hand up, not a handout, and a marketing loan program that can support farmers at a very minimal level is a must for that. Secondly, for a safety net, we think that there are a number of things that we should be doing to help the livestock sector as well that go along with Freedom to Farm, making improvements to Freedom to Farm. We think that consumers in this country should be able to identify meat in the supermarket, whether it comes from this country or from another country. So we think meat should be labeled if it comes from other countries. We also think that the packers of livestock should be required to disclose all the prices that they give to all producers, not just to those farmers who provide livestock on the cash market, but all the contracts that are given and all the captive supplies. Those prices should be revealed as well, so farmers can have an open and clear marketplace in order to market their product.
So right now, some big producer of hogs, say, that has 6,000 head, could be getting a better price than the guy down the road doing 300 or 400, a much smaller operation. Is that what we find now, or do we even know?
Well, I think that there's been articles in the paper that point to that.
Right.
They're selling on a volume basis, and what I brought up to you earlier in the program was that the old farm program gave farmers supply management ability.
Mm-hmm.
Well, basically, you have meat packers now employing the same contract, or the same concept rather. They're trying to manage the supply on their kill floor. So those people they can buy from who can produce them big volumes, that's who they're dealing with,
mm-hmm.
and they're willing to pay a premium for that. And that leaves the small farmer in a residual supplier situation.
Sure.
And it's getting worse by the day.
So it's kind of I can see that. So how do we address that? Through this question of publishing the prices that packers are paying to the larger suppliers?
I think that's the first step.
Okay.
Once we get that information, we'll be able to have a very clear picture of what the marketplace is actually doing. We also should clearly define what is a discriminatory practice, what is unfair, and what is fair in the marketplace. Mm-hmm. And that's something that we are encouraging the Secretary of Agriculture to do right now, is to clearly define what's allowed, what is not allowed. But getting that information out into the marketplace is the first step to finding out what is actually happening.
Mm-hmm. So what about the question of imported versus non-imported meats? Is there much imported meat in Iowa now? Do we know how do we assess that?
Well,
again, it's not labeled.
That's the point. You can't assess it.
I see.
I mean, in fact, I read just last night about a meat inspector who just recently passed away, and someone was paying a tribute to him in the paper.
Mm-hmm.
And he's been one who has watched food come across the border, and he had written on one inspection sheet, just inspected 2 trucks, took me 24 seconds, and he was fired from the USDA because he was too outspoken. And the fact is, we're not inspecting what's coming in, and that's all the more reason why it needs to be labeled. That, you know, if some of this is bad, and they can use things that are prohibited on, you know, on their products when they raise them in other countries, if it goes bad in this country, we all get to blame for it. And I'm just sure American consumers would rather buy American products if they had the choice.
You bet. Well, it's hard to imagine all the product produced in this state to think we're importing South American or Brazilian or some sort of beef or pork from some other place. Just doesn't seem like that makes any sense at all.
Well, and then everything you buy other than food has a label on it where it's made.
Right.
You know, why is food not that
Sure,
way? Most
sure.
important thing that keeps you alive.
You bet. That's a good point. In terms of the current situation with moving the payments up a year, there's talk about moving the 99 payments to 98 because of some of the flood and drought conditions we've seen around the country. Is the Farmers Union supportive of that, and what's maybe some short-term benefit, but what are the long-term consequences of that, Aaron?
Well, certainly there's no, it's a short-term remedy, but it also is somewhat short-sighted as well. I think if that's the only solution we have for the current price crisis, then I think we're not working towards a solution at all. The ones who are probably going to benefit most, in fact, are probably those who are lenders who will be guaranteed that the farmer will have a little bit to pay this year, and landlords who are also be receiving a rental check right at the beginning of the year. But it's a very, very short-term aid, and doesn't really address the fundamental problems that we're facing with the Freedom to Farm Bill.
Sure. So one of the issues is the political clout of farmers and making changes to the Farm Bill again. And as the name suggests, Iowa Farmers Union. Are farmers ready to get more together and maybe not join a union or unions as we typically think of labor unions, but not a bad idea. Pretty independent group of folks, and some folks supporting this bill. You know, I know farmers over in my county, Johnson County, that think this farm bill is a good idea. Are farmers going to get more organized to speak more from a more unified voice, do you think, Gary?
That's a tough question. You know, farmers are identified as being really independent, and we are, and I think that's probably why we produce so much. But at some point in time here, you know, we just get less and less and less in numbers. We're either going to have to, or we're going to be gone. It's a sad commentary what's happening in rural America, where we used to be neighborly and where everybody worked together and everybody had a common interest, and that's fast going away when we take on the concepts that big business is trying to force onto us. It's not good, and it's not good for the people in town either.
Aaron, how, in terms of the growth of your organization, do you see more interest by farmers in getting more organized?
Oh, I think as the price crisis really has come to a head, I think we're seeing more and more interest to going to a program that is flexible and adapts to market conditions rather than something that's simply a handout no matter what the conditions are. It really makes no sense to be sending out checks through the farm program when prices were in the $4 range. On the other hand, it makes no sense to adjust the levels of support when prices near record lows. It's very true that 50 years ago, the prices for a bushel of corn were very similar to what we're having today, and in many areas it was higher than what we're having today. That case probably doesn't exist for any other industry in the United States.
Sure. We're getting down to our last couple minutes. On that point, really, what can viewers do? What can people living in urban areas? I know corn's at about $1.70 to 87 a bushel, and a box of cornflakes is $2.50. You know, who's making the? You know, somebody's making the money other than farmers. What else can urban folks do to support small and medium farmers in Iowa?
Well, I guess I'll point to what I used when I was in Washington, and consumers need to talk to the people at their supermarkets. This ad shows 6 pounds of pork, 6 pounds of potato salad, and 6 pounds baked beans, and a 16-inch tray of vegetables for $89.99. And when I had done this at Washington, I had just sold hogs for 250-pound hogs for $84.37. So you're getting 6 pounds of pork here as a consumer, and obviously a few vegetables and potato salad for $89. And we're selling 250 pounds of pork out in the country for $84.37. Somebody's making exorbitant profits here. And I don't think the consumer realizes that this is going on. They get accustomed to convenience and to paying these prices, and maybe they get the false impression that the farmer's making this money.
Right.
But
Sure.
as an example I'm just used here, it sure shows we're not, and we're showing that these things don't pass down to the consumer like they should.
Mm-hmm.
If we've got hog prices this low,
Mm-hmm.
this shouldn't
Right.
be.
Well, IBP made what? Doubled its profits to $180 million, I believe, last year. Somebody's making money.
You bet.
That's
Aaron,
right.
a closing comment on this.
Well, I think it's very important for people to get involved very quickly, as Congress has a short amount of time to consider changes to the Farm Bill, positive changes. While we can keep planning flexibility for farmers, having a support system for a broad set of family farmers is extremely important, and that message needs to get across to our members of Congress.
Very good. You've heard it here. Get out there and talk to your members of Congress. We've got elections coming up. If you care about having small and medium and even some large farmers stay in business producing food for us, you've got some role to play here. You've been watching Iowa News and Views. My name's Joe Balk, and we're glad you joined us. Here's some information on how to contact the Iowa Farmers Union, their 800 number there. I've got a couple other things to show you before we get out of here. I'd like to thank Derek Maurer, who directed the program. Thank you, Derek, for being here. And yours truly produced it. You've been watching Iowa News and Views. I'd like to thank Aaron and Gary for joining us today. Iowa Farmers Union doing some good work in this state. And we're pleased to be here on your farm today. Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
You've been watching Iowa News and Views. We've got a truck going by. Remember, this is just a TV program, and what's important is what you're doing each and every day in your community to make it a better place. Whether it's in your community or on the farm, get busy. We'll see you next time. Thanks.